All right, thanks, and welcome everybody to the Codes Fair and Farmers Market meeting. I show 4:50 on June 2nd, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to commence with a calling of the roll here. Councilmember Cash.
Councilman Sledge, you'll just need to make the motion about the meeting to begin.
Oh, I got to do the meeting one first. Sorry, we're doing this differently. All right, let's do the motion. Pursuant to Governor Lee's Executive Order number 16 regarding electronic meetings as extended by Executive Order number 34, I make a motion that this committee meeting agenda constitutes essential business of the Metropolitan Council, and that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Can I get that motion in a second?
So moved.
Second.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Yeah.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. All right. Now we will take the roll. All right. Councilmember Cash, are you here? Councilmember Gamble.
Present.
Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Hall was in planning, so he may take a minute to come back over. Councilmember Hancock.
Present.
Councilmember Johnston. I saw Councilmember Johnston. See her here, so I'm gonna, this counter is being in the room here. Councilmember Pulley.
Present.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Roberts. I believe she's gonna need to come back. She was in planning as I left. Councilmember Swope, I think I heard you.
Yep, I'm here.
Great. And then Councilmember Withers was coming over with me. Councilmember Withers, are you on? Yet. And then Councilmember Young.
Present.
Perfect. Okay. Great. We've got 7 members currently, and I'll keep an eye out for everybody else. I am going to roll the first bill on second reading, which is BL 2022-76, because I believe Councilmember Hall needs to come back in. So we'll roll that to the hill. We'll go to the bills on third reading, which is substitute BL 2019-78 by Sledge, by me, amends the Metro Code to impose a minimum distance requirement for new short-term rental properties not owner-occupied from churches, schools, daycares, and parks. There are amendments on this, so I get just a motion to consider the bill, and we'll go to.
So move. Second.
Okay. Great, thanks y'all. All right, I am going, so the first amendment is my amendment. This is the one that I've formed with stakeholders. So I would ask for a motion for us to discuss Amendment 1 to the bill.
Motion to move Amendment 1.
Second.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll give the explanation. So Amendment 1 was formulated in concert with several stakeholders who many of whom who spoke at the public hearing regarding sort of being somewhere in the development pipeline regarding these projects. We talked through what could be a sort of bright line that wasn't subject to Metro interpretation, but was clear by all departments and clear by the stakeholders, developers, property holders, that they knew what the enactment date or deadline would be. So where we landed was this amendment. The date is September 1 of this year. And the bright line, as I call it, is to have your master permit on file with codes. The way we arrived at that, again, I was talking about trying to find something that everybody knew what was expected. They didn't have to guess. I talked with codes and planning as well about what they recommended. We had considered some other forms of permits that we decided were a little too open to interpretation, or quite frankly, would have not helped, kind of resolve the issues that some of these property holders were having. So that's where we landed. It was definitely a compromise date and facility, but everyone who I spoke with, and I spoke with stakeholders who ranged from somebody who had 2 units and already had his use and occupancy permit, so he was basically done, all the way to somebody who was in the midst of applying for a master permit, but had not yet been reviewed. They hadn't even submitted the application. And everybody agreed, yeah, we can hit that September 1 deadline. In fact, codes had told me of all the projects they reviewed, they thought they could hit an August 1 deadline, but this gives some additional confidence on all sides. And the good thing is, as we talk through all those projects, Codes has a realization, they're familiar with these things. And the master permit also allows for all the departments to have given their review. So, they know that it's a project that's occurring. They've given their feedback, anyone from Public Works to Fire. And so it gives sort of the green light to say, yeah, we know what you're doing. So with that, that's my explanation. If there's discussion on the amendment, please raise your hand and I'll call on. Scrolling up and down. Do not see any hands. Okay. All right. In that case, we'll take a vote on Amendment 1. I'm going to try to use a method that I think was effective in planning. If you want to vote no, I will also ask about abstentions. If you want to vote no on this Amendment 1, please use the raise hand. Okay, I'm waiting, but I don't see any. And then I will ask for, if you need to abstain on Amendment 1, you need to raise your hand. Okay, Councilmember Johnson, I've got you as abstaining on Amendment. Okay, all right, with that, we'll put, thank you, Councilmember Johnson. With that, Amendment 1 will be recommended on the substitute. There are several other amendments that are in the packet for this bill. Does anyone want to offer any of the other amendments on this legislation? Just raise your hand and I'll come. I'm looking, I do not, Councilmember Allen, let me. Councilmember Allen, if you want to unmute, you will be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not on this committee, so I can't actually move the amendment. I had two. One has been superseded by yours, and I appreciate you making the effort to do that. And the other was in response to the conversation that took place at the Planning Commission. If this group would like to discuss that and someone would be willing to move that second amendment that deals with the downtown code, I've not had the opportunity to talk with anybody about it and would appreciate that discussion if someone on the committee would be interested in moving it.
I'd like to move the amendment for discussion.
Second.
All right, great. Councilman Brown, go right ahead on amendment.
Thank you. This simply carves out the downtown code as sort of a special area where there is a lot of residential and church and other things on top of each other. I went back and listened to the Planning Commission discussion that took place after the second public hearing at Planning Commission, and several of the planning commissioners expressed concerns specifically about the downtown code area and that if it made sense in that one specific area to where things are so dense upon each other, not to treat it differently. So this is in response to that, specifically I think the 505 is right across from Downtown Presbyterian Church in a commercial area where I think we don't necessarily expect to have families there. So in response to that request of the Planning Commission to have the council take that up and discuss it, I wanted to get that on the table. So thank you for that opportunity.
Of course, thanks, Councilman Brown. The other members of the committee, does anybody want to discuss Amendment 2? Right, I see Councilmember.
Oh, sorry. I didn't.
Let me go to Councilmember Gamble first. Yeah, if you need to raise your hand, raise your hand. Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to have a follow-up question for Councilmember Allen about this amendment. So you're proposing the amendment to exempt the downtown area from the requirements of the bill because there's the I guess the idea that it will be commercial, maintained commercial, and there isn't really much residential in that area. Is that the reason?
There's an increasing amount of residential in downtown, but I think as Councilmember Sledge had raised the issue of why this amendment, why this change to the short-term rental code is important is to keep the areas close to churches, daycares, and schools available for families who actually live there. And I think that's something that we should consider. In general, I think in the downtown area, the type of residential that we see downtown tends not to be that same demographic. And therefore, you know, a discussion of treating it differently seems appropriate, as well as the fact that much of downtown is hotels and that type of guest downtown as well. It's not as much of an intrusion in a neighborhood as it is in the areas around town that we are trying to protect. So I respect the robust discussion that took place at the Planning Commission and felt that it would be helpful for the council to have that same discussion as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Gamble. Councilmember Young.
Thank you, Chair. I guess along that same line of thinking, currently downtown, there's not a set distance that a hotel would need to be from any of the protected properties in this bill. Is there, like churches?
I'd say that's accurate. I'm looking on the list just to make sure. I guess.
And maybe an easier way to ask that is currently I could go build a hotel across the street from a church downtown.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Currently, okay. If you've got the right, you've got the right.
Right. There's not a distance barrier. Well, in that case, along the same line of thinking as Councilmember Allen, I do think that it is kind of a different residential dynamic downtown, and I would be in favor of this amendment in that case, just because it is just a completely different sort of jurisdiction, really, as far as I'm not picking my words very well, but I think y'all get what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, I think folks understand. I'm going to go Councilmember Withers as he's vice chair of the committee, and then I'm going to go to Councilmember O'Connell, who I see has joined and has his hand up as he represents DTC. Councilmember Withers.
Thank you. I'm so glad that Councilmember O'Connell was going to join. What I was going to share with Councilmember Allen is that the Planning and Zoning Historical Committee, we went through several of the amendments, including several of mine. And I had raised this one for discussion on the floor of Planning and Zoning, and Councilmember O'Connell shared his thoughts with us on it at that time. And now that he's joined our group, I would welcome him to repeat that for this committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my perspective on this is having represented downtown for quite some time and seeing so much non-owner occupied short-term rental clustered there, activity clustered there, because it is not residential zoning. I think Councilmember Sledge's original rationale for this makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of urban residents, and I want to make sure, to Councilmember Sledge's point, that they have as regular access to public amenities that are publicly funded as anybody else, and I do not intend to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Connell. Looking for any other hands on the amendment. Okay, all right, I think that's finished discussion. I'll give one additional point, and I think Councilmember Allen did describe the discussion in Planning Commission accurately. I agree with sort of the conversation they were having. I will note, you know, there's, I understand where Councilman O'Connell is coming from, and obviously he's, you know, representing the DTC. I will note that, you know, one of the main examples that came up both from Planning Commission and what Councilmember Allen mentioned was 505, right? Because it's near some of these properties. I'm sure many of you saw last week, all the non-owner occupied short-term rentals are now moving to long-term apartments. They're moving to apartments. It's something like, and Councilmember O'Connell, correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 140 units that are coming for residents instead of short-term rental. Note there. I've got hands again. I'm going to go to Councilmember Pulley because he hasn't spoken yet. Councilmember Pulley. Oh, Russ, you there?
Just a brief attempt to clarify. Councilman O'Connell, did I hear you say you did not intend to support this amendment?
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Gotcha. I'm going to go back to Vice Chair Withers, and I'll come to you, Councilman Brown.
Thank you, Chair Sledge. This is actually a technical question, which is a little bit more appropriate for the Codes Committee than it would have been for the Planning and Zoning Committee. But do I understand your legislation? If a building already exists, does this apply to, because your legislation pertains to having a master permit already in place by September 1st? So if a building already exists, is someone able still to get that kind of a permit, or would this only apply to buildings that might be under construction at some point in the future? That's a very technical question, but I wanted to seek clarification on that. Thank you.
No, very fair one. I'm going to turn to Mrs. Zeitlin with our legal counsel, or maybe Mr. Cooper. I see both of them are on. One of them to be able to address that.
I would have to look again at the language of the bill, but I think it only applies to new buildings or new construction. So if you already had a building that was built out and you were just converting the use, I'm not sure that it would apply. But if you'll give me a few seconds, I'll pull the bill language up and look at it.
Great. Good question, Vice Chair. While we wait for Mr. Cooper, Councilmember Allen.
Thank you for letting me speak again. I just want to acknowledge that, because of the interesting situation in which we've been meeting, I have not been able to speak with Councilmember O'Connell about this. And so this has been my first opportunity to have that, to be able to get his input. And I appreciate his perspective on that. And as the council member who has downtown, I certainly defer to his opinion on that. So, but I thought it was important to have this discussion. I appreciate y'all letting me part of the codes meeting. Thank you.
Always welcome. Councilmember Allen. With that said, since Vice Chair Withers' question, I think is really more about the amendment we passed versus DTC. Council and Vice Chair Withers, you tell me if I'm off base. I'm going to call for a vote on Amendment 2. Vice Chair Withers, are you comfortable with that? Is that accurate description of your technical question?
Well, my technical question was just on your amendment because it does set the date of being September 1st, and when it references having a master permit on file, that's what I was wondering is if, again, because kind of what I'm thinking of a little bit is we have a lot of structures, for example, along Gallatin, or sometimes that folks are looking at adaptive reuse possibilities. So that may address some of those concerns that I have from folks who frankly are trying to reuse an existing building and not create, additional stuff in the neighborhood. But that's part of my question, is just to technically understand if a building already exists, would it have to go through the public hearing process to get a permit versus are we only talking about new construction buildings?
Gotcha. I see Mr. Cooper is unmuted.
So here, this is John Cooper. I looked at the language and I actually had not heard the term master development permit until this amendment came up. So my assumption is that applies to the actual building, not to a particular use. So that if the building was constructed, then under your amendment, it would be grandfathered in.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say, and I do want to have a point of clarification just real quick. Under this legislation, which has always been the case under this legislation, if you currently have a permit and a non-owner occupied permit and you're affected, you would still be able to
correct
obtain that permit.
Yeah, I was more about an adaptive reuse situation.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it is. Okay, I do want to know we're on Amendment 2, which is about exempting the DTC from this legislation. So on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call for the vote on this one, and I'm going to do yes, no, and abstain. Okay, so to restate, Amendment 2 would exempt the downtown code from from this legislation. So if you are in favor of exempting the downtown code from this legislation, please use your raise hand button. I'm going to give it a second just to make sure. Don't see any hands. So now I'm going to ask if you are against exempting the downtown code from this legislation, please use your raise hand button. I see council members Gamble, Stiles. Member Stiles, you're not on this committee, but thank you for participating. Councilmember Young, Councilmember Pulley, Councilmember Swope, Councilmember Gamble, Councilmember Withers, Councilmember Sledge. I believe that's 6 against. If Hannah or John, if you can help me count that just to be sure. 1, 2, I saw 3, 4. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we have yes, no, or yes, 0, no, 6. Does anyone need to abstain from Amendment 2? Please use the raise hand button. Councilmember Pulley and Councilmember Withers, your hands are still up. I didn't know if you meant to abstain. You see Councilmember Johnston has abstained. Councilmember Pulley, your hands down. Councilmember Withers, you abstaining?
No, sir, just juggling multiple notifications.
I got you. Okay, Councilmember Johnston, you're abstaining voting. So Amendment 2 is not recommended. 0 for, 6 against, 1 abstain. Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to offer any of the other amendments that were in the packet? Raise your hand and I'll come to you. All right, I don't see any hands. So, all right, we are on BL 2019-78, substitute BL 2019-78 as amended with Amendment 1. Any discussion on the substitute bill as amended before we take a vote? Right, I'm not seeing any hands. So what I'm gonna do is, I know we're gonna have an abstention. So here's what I'm gonna do. Anybody who is against BL 2019, substitute BL 2978 as amended, if you are against it, put your hand up, your raise hand button. Okay, I've got Councilmember Young as a no. I don't see anybody else. Maybe my dog. All right, and then anybody who's abstaining. Councilmember Johnson, did you need to abstain from the bill entirely? I got you. Councilmember Johnson, yeah, I got you. Okay, got you. So we got 1 abstention. So based on our count, I've got 5 yeses, 1 no, 1 abstention. 2019-78 substituted and amended, recommended. Thank y'all for hanging with me on the procedure. Councilmember Hall, I do not see you. Is there anybody else who is on BL 2020-276? Who is a sponsor? This is amends Title V of the Metro Code to establish a development impact. Don't see anybody raising their hand, so I'm going to turn to Mr. Cooper and ask. I don't think I have a letter. I see a proposed substitute here, but I'm loath to try to describe it without the.
What was the bill number again? And I'll look it up on.
Sure, it's 2020-276. This is the one that amends Title V of the Metro Code to establish a development impact.
Looking at the responses, it looks like Berkshire is on the call. Johnston, Benedict, Bradford, and Cleaver are all.
Okay, great.
So if any of those are here, they can.
Yeah, if you'd like to, so if you are any of the members who was just described, who is a sponsor, looks like Councilmember Johnston, you still have your hand up. Would you like to make a motion on the bill, BL 2020-276? Councilmember Johnston, I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. I have to wait on that. Councilmember, is there any other, Councilmember Johnston is a member of the committee, but is there anybody else who's attending the meeting, who's a co-sponsor, who would like to request a motion from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, would it be an appropriate time to just make a motion to defer one meeting? Because I also think there was some mixed information being given out yesterday evening in finance about this bill.
Yeah, that is a proper motion. Do I have a second for a one meeting?
I second that.
Right. Any discussion on the one meeting deferral? I do want to give Councilmember Johnston just, okay, she took her hand down. Just want to make sure everybody's got a chance to speak. All right, she does have her hand up. Councilmember Johnston, you want to try again? Hannah or John, do you think you could maybe try to get a hold of Councilmember Johnston and see if she can? I don't want to make any vote with the sponsor of the bill here.
She says that she's having some difficulty technically.
Okay.
She also indicates she would support a deferral.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Pulley. That's extremely helpful. Sorry, Councilmember Johnson. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Okay, with that, before us, a committee properly seconded, we had a one meeting deferral motion. I'm going to do the same thing we've been planning. If you are against the one meeting deferral motion, we'll use the raise hand button. Right? Any abstentions? Councilman Johnson removed her. So the one meeting deferral motion of BL 2020-276 passes. So we recommend a one meeting deferral. All right, y'all. Our two bill agenda has come to a close. So thank all y'all, and that will conclude the Codes, Fair, and Farmers Market Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.